Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Plastic-Free Great Lakes, an Advocacy Toolkit to make a difference in your community. I'm Jennifer Caddick, Alliance for the Great Lakes Vice President of Communications and Engagement. I'll be moderating today's conversation, and I'm joined here in the Alliance's Chicago office by Joel Bremeyer, Alliance for the Great Lakes President and CEO, Adam Ballard from Access Living, and Andrea Densham with the Shed Aquarium. We're joined remotely by Nate Dragg, who is in the Alliance's Buffalo, New York office. Before we get started, I want to share a few details on logistics. We are excited to have over 550 people registered to join us today. To limit background noise, all participant lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar. We have included plenty of time for questions after the presentation, and you may submit a question at any time. Just use the question box as shown here to submit your question. And now to get started, I'll turn things over to Joel Bremeyer, Alliance for the Great Lakes President and CEO.
Thank you, Jen. Hello, everybody, and thanks so much for taking a little time out of your day to talk about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. That's why we're here today. So we're going to be talking about what we know about the impacts of plastic in the Great Lakes, how we're working to confront that problem in an inclusive way that can help everybody and build support from everybody in the Great Lakes, and how we can take action and advocate to reduce the amount of plastic getting into our water, something I know that you're all interested in. So to get started today, I want to talk a little bit about the scale of the issue here in the Great Lakes, because you've no doubt heard a lot about ocean plastic pollution, but perhaps not as much about what's happening in the Great Lakes. There are approximately 22 million pounds of plastic entering the Great Lakes every single year. That's from an estimate from a study by the Rochester Institute of Technology. Just to put that in perspective, at the Alliance, we run a program called Adopt a Beach, which is a volunteer program focusing on beach and coastal cleanups, and about 15,000 volunteers spend hours every year cleaning up the shoreline and pick up about 40,000 pounds of trash, most of which is plastic. But that's a small amount when you compare it to the scale of the problem. That's why we need layers of the kinds of actions and solutions you're going to hear about today to effectively address what is a really complex and persistent problem. Plastic is coming into the Great Lakes from countless sources. Just your basic litter, manufacturing, shipping, stormwater runoff from communities, and microplastics and small fibers are even coming off of your clothing going in the wash and going back into our waters. So there's a lot of sources, and there is no single solution that's going to solve the problem. Plastic pollution in the Great Lakes is a lot different from what you might be used to hearing about in the oceans. Number one, it's generally pretty tiny. You've probably heard the word microplastics a lot, and we have a lot of microplastics in the Great Lakes. Contrast this with those images of giant balls of old fishing nets that you might see from ocean plastic concerns. Plastic is actually in our drinking water already. Some of these particles are so small that they are getting into processed drinking water and are showing up in products such as beer and bottled water. The plastic here in the Great Lakes is not coming to us from some far-flung place. It's actually being created. The debris is being created here in the Great Lakes region and washing out into our water. Fresh water, as everybody on this call knows, is different from salt water. And the science of fresh water, its freezing patterns and currents, actually affects how plastic distributes itself in the Great Lakes. And at the bottom of the list here, there's simply a lot less information and data about plastics in the Great Lakes than what we know about in the marine environment. So we've got some work to do to catch up. So the scale and the complexity of all this can seem really intimidating, but this is our water. This is our source of fresh drinking water. This is the water we use for recreation and fishing and to support our Midwest economy. We can't afford not to figure out how to solve this problem with a mix of approaches and a mix of people around the region who are going to be pushing for solutions. So we can all take individual actions that cut our personal use of plastic. We can go out and we can clean up a beach or a park or anywhere in our communities. But bigger picture policy solutions are going to be critical and sure ways of addressing plastic pollution in a systematic way across the Great Lakes region. So today we're releasing our Plastic-Free Great Lakes Toolkit, and we include information in this toolkit about plastic reduction policies and some examples of how communities across the region are taking action, along with some plastic myths and facts for you to read and get educated about what's really going on in the water. And finally, and maybe most importantly, we're going to offer some tools that allow you to get active and make a difference in your community, to educate locally in your communities and to engage decision makers and people who can influence solutions. So with that, I'm going to introduce all of our speakers quickly here and then turn things over to our first one. Today we're going to hear first from Nate Dragg, who is the Water Project Manager at the Alliance for the Great Lakes, about policies that communities are pursuing across the region. After Nate, we're going to hear from Adam Ballard, the Housing and Transportation Policy Analyst for Access Living. And Adam will be talking about how to pursue thoughtful and inclusive policy advocacy through the lens of disability advocacy. And he'll be sharing his experiences addressing to proposed straw bans and impacts on people with disabilities. And Andrea Densham is joining us as the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy for the Shedd Aquarium. And she'll be talking to us about how Shedd is using policy, procurement, and partnerships to reduce plastic in the Great Lakes. Following that, we'll have an opportunity for some tool sharing and some Q&A from everybody here on the webinar today. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Nate for our first presentation.
Thanks, Joel. For the last 7.5 years, I've been working with Adopt a Beach volunteers who go out and clean up their local beaches and local shorelines. And like you just heard, our volunteer efforts are truly impressive. But there's no way that cleanups alone or individual behavior change alone can stand up to the 22 million pound scale of our Great Lakes plastic pollution problem. So my team and I have been looking at different policy approaches that communities around the region are taking to address this issue. And we've found that there are a lot of routes that communities can take, and there's a lot that we can learn from the efforts that they've taken. Inside the toolkit, there are examples of different policies that communities are pursuing. Some of them you may recognize and are very familiar, like litter laws or bottle deposits, while others may be new, including stormwater management policies that address runoff and litter. We've seen successful advocacy efforts at the local level to put these and other types of policies in place in communities around the region. And we've also seen them add up to larger national wins. While the toolkit includes several examples, we're going to focus on two specific ones today: Chicago's plastic bag ordinance and the movement to ban plastic microbeads. Chicago's effort to cut back on plastic bags was not necessarily a straightforward path. In 2014, the city of Chicago passed an ordinance to prevent stores from providing disposable plastic bags. But unfortunately, this initial ban did not work for two reasons. First, the original law defined disposable plastic bags based on the thickness of the bag, as opposed to the material it was made of or the number of intended uses. And secondly, it did not take into consideration some of the challenges that this new regulation would create for the business community or for low-income residents of Chicago. Advocates from groups like Bring Your Own Bag Chicago urged the city to address these loopholes, even if it meant forgoing an outright ban approach. So in 2016, the city of Chicago passed a new ordinance that uses a fee to shift consumer behavior instead. This current law splits a 7 cents per bag fee between the city and retailers, and it also includes an exemption for low-income residents so that they are not disproportionately burdened by the fee. Preliminary results show that this policy is working and is changing behavior. So there's a key lesson that we can take away from this experience. In order to be successful, compromises were needed to close the loopholes while making sure the policy was achievable for businesses and consumers at all income levels. The second example we're going to look at today is the ban on plastic microbeads, which are the tiny plastic particles used as an abrasive in many personal care products like facial scrubs, soaps, and shampoos. When research came out showing an alarming number of plastic microbeads in the Great Lakes, people were rightly outraged. This eye-opening research led people to take action, and thousands of them across the Great Lakes called upon their elected officials to ban microbeads. Illinois became the first state in the nation to pass such a law to ban non-biodegradable microbeads, and soon many other states and counties did the same. This led to a patchwork of laws that eventually even led the industry opponents to support a consistent federal level legislation. And thankfully, in late 2015, Congress passed a bill phasing out the production and sale of personal care products containing microbeads. President Obama signed this ban into law in December of 2015, which led to the phasing out of microbeads in 2018. There are a few lessons in this example that are really important to consider. The first being those small-scale actions can add up to a huge victory at the federal and even international level. That strategy can work, and it can be replicated. And the second lesson is that good policy is nuanced. In this case, even though the Microbead Free Waters Act seems like an outright ban, there's actually a lot more nuance to it. The law exempts medically necessary products that contain plastic microbeads, and the phase-out was strategically designed so it was achievable. So as you can see in these examples, we don't necessarily get it right the first time. Just like any problem-solving effort, advocacy work and policy development is actually a learning process. And there's been times when the environmental movement has made serious missteps. For example, as the current movement to ban plastic straws has really charged ahead, it's often done so without consideration for the impacts that these policies have on people with disabilities who may rely on straws. So right now we're in a position where we need to learn from these critiques and work together with people directly impacted to come up with better solutions. There's a lot of room for a lot of good work to be done at all levels, and we've learned that for the best and most impactful policies, that comes when we work together. So now I'm going to hand it off to Adam Ballard, who can speak in greater depth about inclusive policymaking.
Thanks, Nate, and good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Adam Ballard. I'm with Access Living here in Chicago. Just to tell you a bit briefly about our organization, we are the Center for Independent Living in the city of Chicago, which means that we have a federal mandate to provide services and advocacy for people with all kinds of disabilities who want to live independent lives integrated into the community. In order to do that, we, per our federal mandate, the majority of our staff and the majority of our board has to be people with disabilities, because we believe strongly in South African proverb, I believe, nothing about us without us. So we believe that it's really important for people with disabilities to be at the table whenever decisions are being made that impact their lives. So that's kind of the framework of our advocacy work. I work on our advocacy team as a policy analyst, primarily looking at transportation and housing issues. So as I just said, at Access Living, the way we see the world is through that phrase, nothing about us without us. And primarily, as an organization, we haven't historically focused on environmental issues. It's kind of an emerging area for us. I think we'll start to put a lot more attention towards. But historically and traditionally, our focus has been on, again, the things that more immediately impact our ability to live independently. So healthcare, housing, education, employment, issues like that, that impact people with disabilities' lives and our ability to live independently. So taking a look at how proposed straw ban ordinances in Chicago and elsewhere have impacted our community, there is currently discussions, and we're grateful to be at the table with organizations like the Alliance, like SHED, to have our voice heard as well. But there are discussions about how to achieve this, really important goal of reducing single plastic use. A problem has been in the past that we weren't at the table, something that was happening about us without us. And the fact of the matter is that single-use plastic straws specifically are really important to the ability to live independently of a lot of people with disabilities. Not all of us, but plenty of us really need these to have any chance to drink anything, water, or any beverage independently and with some dignity. And we are aware of alternatives, and a lot of the alternative materials don't work for all of us. So therefore, our position has been that we need to move, I think, beyond looking at straws when possible. But if we do move forward in legislation anywhere, we want to make sure that it has a strong opt-in for people with disabilities. It's fine for a restaurant or other place a service to not offer straws proactively. We're fine with that. But if a person with a disability asks for that straw, we really need it to be available. It's important to realize as well that often disabilities aren't apparent or visible. So we really want there not to be a situation where people with disabilities who ask for straws aren't being subjected to 20 questions or have to bring a doctor's note to prove that they actually need the straw. So this is the impact that, an absolute blanket ban would have. And we've seen some of these start to, crop up, not necessarily here in the Great Lakes region yet, but, we've seen it on the West Coast. The European Union is proposing a full straw ban, I think by 2021, and the disability community there is understandably up in arms about that. So, the thinking is out there, and we just need to push back against that whenever we can. Here in Chicago, very recently, on the election that just concluded Tuesday, a ballot question was put on the ballot without any input from anyone at this table. We still don't even know for sure. We have some guesses, but we don't know for sure how it ended up. But, a question about a blanket straw ban was put on the ballot. It's an advisory question. It's not binding. It's not a referendum. But, it could advise city council to move forward with something like this. And because there was no outreach effort, there was no airing of both sides of this issue, it did pass. 55% of the city voted for it. So again, that's just an example of the kinds of problems with not taking that more thoughtful approach. As we move forward, good collaboration and inclusive advocacy looks like this. Looks like our community's relationship with the Alliance, with SHED, with other stakeholders who have approached us to say, listen, we did make a mistake on charging forward on some of this stuff without including your community. We want to walk that back and find something that works for everybody. So engage early on with us. If you're going to move forward with these kinds of policy changes in your communities, find the disability community. Any town of any size in the region should have a Center for Independent Living or some kind of disability rights organization. Find out who those people are and approach them and include them as stakeholders up front and avoid some of these mistakes. And just to wrap up, straws are the big deal, but there are other single plastic issues that impact our community as well. We're willing to find, again, solutions, even including alternate materials for some of these things like packaging and utensils that work for us still. But it's important not to shame people with disabilities for needing things like, single-use packaging or utensils. A lot of us rely on delivery to eat independently as well. So keeping that in mind as we move forward is going to be important. And again, the issue overall is it's not a question of policy and how to do policy right as a big part of it. But we're also seeing businesses start to move proactively as well. Starbucks announcing their straw ban. So we need to be at the table with entities that are moving, more proactively ahead of public policy to make those kinds of decisions as well. So any help that our allies can help us to get to the table with organizations and businesses that are starting to make those decisions is really important as well. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. This is Andrea Densham from Shed Aquarium. This past year has shown the amazing power of collective impact can have on a seemingly intractable problem like plastic pollution. Together, individuals, families, businesses, and conservation groups, along with our partners in government, are working to find innovative solutions to reduce plastic pollution. Each of us has a unique and powerful tools in our toolbox that we can use to make meaningful change. We are joining the Alliance and others in encouraging innovative public policy. And as Adam was just talking about, the larger the table and the more partners at the table to develop that new and innovative policy, the better. We're hoping this will have lasting impact, not simply in cities like Chicago, but across the Great Lakes Basin. And it doesn't need to be in large towns, but cities and villages and counties, all places as well as states can have a lasting change. We also believe that changing government purchasing and policies can create better ways for us both to track plastic pollution and reduce the use of it and come up with innovative solutions, as Adam was just talking about. We've been empowering individuals and families to use their voices and purchasing power to reduce plastic pollution. Our efforts began with an early first step in 2017 to encourage our supporters to think about and learn about the impact of plastic pollution on our Great Lakes and the ocean. Our Shed the Straw campaign started in April of 2017 and sought to raise awareness about the enormity of plastic pollution that's dumped in the Great Lakes in particular. And we really believe and know that individuals and families can make a difference. Providing individuals and families tools to amplify their voices together, encourage businesses and elected officials to make change, it works. But it's important to learn from what we were just talking about with Adam, right? So we need to learn from our partners. Our team at Shed has been honored to sit at the table with and learn from Andy and his colleagues at Access Living. And it has informed how we talk about public education regarding single-use plastic straws and other options. And it's resulted in educating our internal team about disability issues, and it's also informed how we talk with our business partners. And will inform moving forward how we think about having conversations about manufacturing and changes that we might need. And at Shed, we're walking our talk. We're working to reduce single-use plastic in our building. And we have seen from Chambers of Commerce joining their efforts within their neighborhoods to reduce plastic. We've seen businesses like United Airlines make sustainability a priority, and local cities and villages think about making changes, as well as sporting arenas like the White Sox. We've seen them come to the plate. Listening and working together, however, is really critical to ensure that we're making smart and innovative change. And it's important to remember that our cities, towns, and state governments are ours, and that we can work closely with our elected officials and staff to make sustainable public policy. As Nate noted earlier, the laws are a really important tool. However, as Andy noted, they also have some downsides to them. And we often think of laws and bans as the only tool in our policy toolbox. It, however, is not. Our toolbox is full of many other impactful tools, and we can hopefully develop entire policy frameworks around reducing plastic pollution and understand how those interconnected tools can have an even greater impact. For example, this year, after a successful celebration of the microbead ban, we held a New Year's press conference with state, federal, and county elected officials with the Alliance for the Great Lakes and a local organization, IEC, to jointly resolve to reduce plastic use and waste. Cook County leadership took the pledge very seriously and worked with our team at Shed to include impactful new policies and measures and benchmarks in their Forest Preserve Sustainability Plan. Those examples of some of the policies that you can think about doing back in your cities, towns, and states include green purchasing, establishing green purchasing policies that prioritize sustainability, reusable, and compostable alternatives to plastic, creating green concessions policies, meaning concession stands that you may have within your cities and towns or states, restricting and prohibiting use of things like polystyrene or plastic utensils in forest preserves, for example. And thinking about green economics, incentivizing businesses and encouraging them to create innovative and smart solutions to move away from single-use plastic items to more innovative and sustainable packaging, and providing, helping manufacturers make those kind of changes. Also thinking about waste management and ensuring that composting is part of that. And as Nate noted, things like Michigan's bottle deposit is also one important way. The last thing I want to note is something that I often bring up, which is super nerdy, but so am I, and it's about data. We need to be able to start tracking how much plastic pollution is ending up in our fresh waterways, from the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, which we can see from here, to little rivers and streams that find their way into the Great Lakes. We need to make sure that we know how much plastic we're doing, have standardized measures for tracking so that we can know which ones of our policies are having the most impact and which are not. This includes working with water districts and local environmental protection agencies to make sure we can measure and track impact. So thank you very much. And Joel, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Andrea. And I just want to, before I close things out and open this up for Q&A, I want to thank Andrea and Adam and Nate for their conversation today. It's really fantastic to be able to sit at the table with different perspectives and really feel like we're getting a full handle on what it's going to take to actually drive down plastic entering fresh water in a way that works for everybody in the Great Lakes region. We know that everybody in the Great Lakes region should be able to access the benefits of clean and safe fresh water in all of its forms. And so that's what this conversation today is all about. What can you actually do? You have a chance to make a difference at all levels. Everything from very local, very specific to your neighborhood, even your block, up to the level of helping institutions, policymakers, businesses actually change how they do business, how they set policy, how to make sure that we have the right policies and practices in place in our businesses and with our decision makers across the Great Lakes region to make sure that plastic reduction over time is a key priority for the Great Lakes. This is a problem that is going to take a long time to solve, but it's one that, as you've seen today, we're already making good progress on across the Great Lakes region, and that should give everybody hope that this is not an insurmountable problem. So what we're asking you to do today is to download the Plastic Free Great Lakes Toolkit and read more about the issues. Read the case studies of what's worked, read some of the tools that are available to you, and learn more about how you can engage at all levels to reduce plastic here in the Great Lakes. Thanks, everybody, and I'm going to turn things back over to Jen for our Q&A session.
Thanks, everyone. Anybody on the line can submit questions using the question box that you can see here on the screen, and we already have a whole bunch of questions piling in here. One question that I've seen, well, first of all, a housekeeping item. A number of you have written in asking if the slides will be shared after the presentation. This afternoon, all of this information will be available on our website at greatlakes.org. And you also will receive an email later today that includes a recording of this webinar. So you will have all of this information at your fingertips. We're excited that you are all excited about this issue. One item that I see popping up here in the questions that actually is in our toolkit that we didn't have a chance to talk about in the presentations, and I think maybe I'll start with Nate Drag on this question, and that's asking about bans on bans. There are some states here in the Great Lakes region that have what we call bans on bans. And so, Nate, would you be able to really briefly explain what we mean when we say a ban on bans? And maybe give some suggestions for how folks can still pursue advocacy or plastic reduction programs in their communities in those states.
Certainly. So in the Great Lakes region, there's a couple of states that have these ban on bans, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And basically, in a nutshell, it's a statewide policy that prohibits municipalities or counties from placing any kind of ban or fee on single-use items like bags, cups, bottles, and really any type of packaging material that transports food or beverages. So it's really frustrating for a local government to address this problem when they're the ones often dealing with it right in their own city or community. So there's a couple things you can do. In theory, you could advocate for a statewide policy on that. If this policy is designed to prohibit local communities from setting up different policies, you could have one statewide policy, or there's other types of policies beyond bans and fees that you could advocate for. You could have your municipality take decisions that would impact their purchasing behaviors, kind of like what Andrew was talking about. You could have a city that doesn't give out plastic water bottles at their parks, buildings, sports fields, things like that. You could look at your stormwater management plan and potentially have some requirements for trash screens by storm drains, or change a zoning ordinance that would require more trash receptacles near common spots that generate trash. So a lot of creative options out there. And you can find out more about that in the toolkit, and there's a lot of good examples around the country for different communities taking this approach.
Great. Thanks, Nate. A question that I've seen in a couple of different ways submitted by some folks is related to the straw ban, and I think, Adam, I'll hand this question over to you. And it's really asking, like, well, why not just have, instead of plastic straws, having paper straws or compostable straws? And I think a lot of that conversation that I know we've had is about really understanding what the needs of the disability community are. And so I was hoping you could maybe talk a little bit more about that, and again about how folks can reach out to the disability community in their neighborhoods and their areas.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so the question about alternative straws is an important one. And the basic answer is that the disability community, our needs widely range, right? So, for some people, a paper straw works. For some people, or a bamboo straw or a metal reusable straw. Those things can work for some people in the community. But especially any kind of reusable straw can be tricky for a lot of people with limited dexterity, because you need to be able to rewash the straw or use it again, right? And that's a problem for a lot of us. So any kind of reusable straw is a problem for folks because of that. As far as alternate materials, some people with disabilities have, a bite reflex, or they produce a lot of saliva because of their disability, and a paper straw cannot stand up to that. It'll just be demolished within a few seconds. I've seen it happen. So not every alternative material is going to work for everybody. Bamboo has some heat conduction problems. It's also, it's a more rigid material. So again, with people with a bite reflex, that can damage their mouth to use a metal or a bamboo straw. So, we understand the impulse to try and suggest those alternatives. And again, some of us do use those, but it's just, there is no one size fits most or all solution except for the good old single-use plastic straw. So that's why we've taken the position that we've taken.
Thanks, Adam. That's really helpful. I'm also seeing a number of questions here that I'll sort of lump together, asking about where people can find data and information on the sort of breadth of the plastic pollution problem in the Great Lakes. At the beginning of the conversation, Joel referenced the Rochester Institute of Technology study. And so I guess, Andrea and Nate, maybe I could ask you, where would you suggest people go for that kind of information? Andrea, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I think, you heard me speaking at the end about the need for data. So a number of researchers across the Great Lakes Basin are doing really great work, working with folks, data that is coming, some from the Alliance for the Great Lakes and beach cleanups, and others that are going off and doing really thoughtful research in Great Lakes basins and in rivers and streams to try to understand the magnitude of the issue. Those are good sources, and they're a really great place to start. I'm just going to reiterate, I think, the importance for us to think about developing better mechanisms for us to use, like here in the Chicagoland area, MWRD, working in partnership with them or a local EPA to find ways to standardize our collection and measurement of microplastics in the water. We're tracking many other contaminants in the water. Now's a good time for us to think about standardizing the methodology around that and testing it out. I think we're not at the place where we have a common framework for that yet. So now's a great time for us to invest in good, solid research that will give us great data that will allow us to monitor it on a regular basis moving forward. And Nate, you probably have other suggestions too.
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting time because there's a lot of research coming out in the Great Lakes. It's not exciting because we're finding out how much plastic is out there, but within the last 10 years, we've kind of had this explosion of research happening in our region as opposed to the world's oceans. One great one that comes to mind was a study done by the USGS on 29 tributaries across the Great Lakes, and that was really one of the first studies looking at the amount of microplastics and the variety of them in the tributaries. We can send those links out, and there's various studies that have looked at the variety of microplastics in the open water of the Great Lakes. So there's a lot of really great research happening, and it's tricky because these obviously microplastics are tiny, but it's a really good science happening. So it's important to translate that into policy and public outreach as well.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here that are asking about recommendations for reducing single-use plastic waste at schools or other large organizations. And I guess, Andrea, maybe I'll start with you on that question and see if you have any thoughts or could share some information about what the Shed Aquarium has done. I know the aquarium has done a lot of work thinking about how you use plastic in your facility.
Yeah, we have, and we're in fact in the midst of a comprehensive audit of our plastic, which is something a school or a business can do. Even a restaurant can think about what kind of plastic or how many plastic bags you're using, and in our shop we've noticed how many gloves we are using, and we've come up with a solution for recycling them. So thinking about that and analyzing it is really, really helpful. In a school, it's really helpful because it can be an activity that teachers and classrooms can do and then come up with innovative solutions and other ideas. So using reusable items for places that can is fantastic. Reducing the need for extra production of things that we could use over and over again is one great way. Then using things that can be compostable is another great way. We were just talking about utensils earlier today, and that's a great way to think about it, using bamboo forks or knives or spoons, something that can be composted and then go back to the earth. I know in my home, I do that, and it helps me grow amazing tomatoes. So thinking about new and innovative ways, and we're happy to send a link to some partners that we work with to the Alliance that can be shared with everyone on the webinar today.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea. And Adam and Nate, I don't know if you would want to weigh in on that question with any ideas or thoughts. You don't have to.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that was good.
Okay, great. There's a number of questions about microplastics and microfibers. So those tiny plastic pieces, that aren't straws or a cup or a bottle that you can pick up off the beach or off the street and make sure it gets into the recycling stream. But instead, those tiny little pieces in the water. And so, Nate, I guess I'll turn this one to you first. And the first question is, what's being done to address microplastics or microfibers? I know you talked a little bit about the microbead ban, but maybe you talk a little bit more about that.
Definitely. So, the term microplastics really refers to 5 or so different types of small piece of plastic. So you have your microfibers, which break off of synthetic fabrics like polyester. You have your fragments, so tiny pieces of plastic that break off larger items like bottles. You have your beads and pellets, which are those tiny spheres that were designed to be small. You have your foams, so tiny fragments from polystyrene, and then you have film, so tiny pieces of bags and other thin plastic packaging. So since there's kind of a variety of microplastics, each one would need a little bit different approach to address it. Microbeads, there was a very linear path. We saw what products they were in, so you can kind of address that. Some of the other ones are a bit more complex. For fibers in particular, there's a lot of research going on at a number of levels. The type of materials that are used for clothing, furniture and carpets, redesigning washing machines to see if filters can be put in there, incorporating some products in your washing machine that could capture some of those fibers. And there's a few products out on the market right now that have shown to reduce the amount of microfibers going out. And then looking at the end of the path, too, at wastewater treatment facilities to see if there's anything that they can do. But a lot of that design is really in the early stages. So hopefully there's some innovators out there also thinking about this problem that can help with the design components of it.
And some really exciting things around innovation that I think we can begin to encourage our governments to do is to help, and in partnership with private sector, especially some foundations and innovative businesses, is to fund innovative solutions. So for packaging, encouraging those folks who are, whether they're packaging beauty products or they're packaging our chips, helping and encourage them to manufacture them in more sustainable packaging is really important. It's also important, as I was saying earlier, for really great data. I was lucky to be invited to a meeting with folks at MIT and an organization called Draper, who puts things on the moon, and folks at EPA who are trying to standardize this what microplastic means and how we can develop really high-quality data to track it over time. So as that stuff is happening, we can encourage consumers and schools and educators and families to talk to their businesses that they purchase things from and encourage them to come up with new innovative solutions.
Great, thanks. We're getting some questions from folks who are excited about getting involved in advocacy and want to make sure that they help others understand why it's important to make sure everybody's at the table and that all opinions are heard, even if it might be considered somewhat of a minority opinion. And so I don't know if any of our panelists, if Adam or Andrea or Joel, would like to offer some encouragement to our supporters about the need to involve as many voices and as many perspectives as possible in the policy arena.
Yes, I'm happy to start on. I'm sure everybody has thoughts on that. I think that this issue, look, we're talking, let me just say, about clean and safe water, right? That's what this is ultimately about. That is an issue that affects everybody because we all need water to live. It affects people in a variety of different ways, and it plays a different role in people's lives across the Great Lakes region. To credibly and fairly and equitably actually address and provide clean and safe water for all people who are affected by clean and safe water need to be involved in that conversation. Now, and that's just a basic principle that we have to start from when we're making decisions about how to protect the Great Lakes. And this is a great example of one of those issues where in order to accomplish the goal of protecting our clean and safe water, people who were affected by those decisions weren't at the table in the first place, and so we're trying to work to change that. But I think that this is not something that's unique to the plastics issue in the Great Lakes. This is simply smart advocacy. This is simply equitable behavior. These are the kinds of actions that the environmental community, anybody seeking to make changes in policies and business practices, needs to keep in mind and lead with when we're making choices about how we work. Simply put, I think Adam said it best. Nothing about us without us. And if you look around and the issue you're working on affects people that aren't in the room, change that.
Yeah, and I would just, thank you, Joel. I agree with everything Joel just said. I would only add that I think that, another thing to keep in mind is that there's still maybe solutions out there that we haven't found yet, right? I'm just saying that right now, the single-use plastic straw is the only thing that works for the majority of our community. I'm not willing personally, I'm not speaking organizationally at this point, but I'm not willing personally to rule out the possibility that there is an innovation out there and a material will come to light someday that works in the same way a plastic straw does without the environmental impact. So, I would, encourage people to reach out and involve the disability community and other minority communities that are impacted. Low-income people, as we heard, are also impacted by a lot of these policies, right? Plastic bags and other things. It's not going to always be easy because, there's grumpy people in those communities. But it's still worth having us at the table instead of at your door angrily pounding on it. We're not against that either.
Yeah. This is Andrea. It's really important to make sure, as I said earlier, and I agree with what both Adam and Joel have just said, to make sure the table is wide and to think hard about who's not at it when you start. And you will start doing work and things will come up that you did not envision it. And when that happens, keep your heart, mind, and ears open. Listen well and hear and really metabolize the suggestions that are being made, and then do what's best. Like continuous quality improvement is about continuously learning new things and improving in real time. Don't be afraid of learning something new, or even having someone provide a critique on what you're doing. It will make you better, smarter, and will make for much more impactful policy. And it will build lasting friendships and partnerships that will raise the voice and amplify our collective impact. So walk into conversations that may be hard and scary, but do it with an open heart and open ears. And I promise you that more times than not, it will improve the impact that you want to have.
Thank you. A question that I have that on here, which I think is a really good one for us to think about. Certainly we have several hundred people on this webinar who are passionate and concerned about plastic pollution. But the question is asking about, well, how informed do we think that the general population is on the plastic pollution issue? And is there a need for awareness and education as well? And I think maybe some of our pieces of the toolkit, which you can download on our website, address that. But I don't know if any of our speakers, Nate or any of our other speakers, would like to address that question.
This is Andrea. And Nate, you can go first if you like. Sorry.
Nope. You go for it, Andrea.
There's a reason why we do public education work at Shedd Aquarium. We obviously believe that it is critically important to provide science-based, evidence-based information that's consumable and understandable to the public, that's accessible for little kids as well as highly sophisticated folks, that allows them the tools and the information to make decisions on their own, and giving them the tools to also make an impact. So there's a reason why we engage restaurants, there's a reason why we engage families, schools, and individuals, because each one of them needs different pieces of information and are part of the solution. So I absolutely think that's the case. And if you're in communities across the Great Lakes, think about what ways you can create public education campaigns that are positive, full of really science-based information, and provide smart solutions.
Thank you. Nate, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just a few thoughts about kind of the uniqueness of plastic pollution. You know, we saw with the microbead ban and a lot of these discussions that are happening now, plastic pollution is an issue that resonates with a lot of people because they use those products. They're familiar with those products. They see them, which is different than a lot of other environmental issues that can seem abstract or geographically very far away. So people they're aware of the concept in general. But I think there's a disconnect sometimes between their individual behavior and the impact on the environment. And one powerful connection or thing that makes that connect is when we have people do beach cleanups or neighborhood cleanups and they see how many pieces of plastic get out there. You know, they might not see people littering, but they tie it to their decisions. They say, hey, I used that coffee cup like that yesterday. Now here it is on the beach. Those things I think really help drive the message back home, which can then lead to personal behavior change or advocacy, especially when you give them the data and the tools. You know, you say, okay, in the Great Lakes, we picked up, you know, this many thousand plastic bottles last year. That's the kind of information that really makes it sink in for them, elected officials, and when they do an outreach.
Great, thank you. I have a number of questions about plastic pollution that happens because of stormwater, combined sewer overflows. And Nate, you touched briefly early on in the questions about opportunities and getting creative in municipalities around their stormwater management plans, their sewer overflow plans. And I don't know if you want to talk any further about that and perhaps give a brief example of some innovation that communities could do and that listeners on the webinar could approach their local governments to encourage.
Certainly. There's some pretty cool stuff happening across the United States. Not as much that I've found in the Great Lakes yet, although there may be some communities out there that I'm not aware of. But some communities on the East Coast, particularly around Maryland and Washington, D.C., and the Anacostia watershed, and a few watersheds in California, they have a total maximum daily load of litter and trash that can go into their water. And, you know, that's a long kind of policy discussion in itself, but that's driven the communities to put a lot of intervention devices throughout their stormwater systems. And that includes trash screens at your storm drains on the street that they have perforations to allow water to go through, but they stand up and keep out solid items up until a certain point when the water gets high enough, and then they open and they allow the water to get through. So it's kind of It prevents flooding, but it captures some items. Then kind of down the system, they have various capture devices, nets, and other screens and basins that can capture the items. So there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do there. When you think about the way parking lots are paved, and even things like rain gardens, that aesthetically you can have plants that can tolerate higher water levels, but that also allows litter and plastic items to flow in there. And yeah, it might look bad when they're stuck in there, but if you, on a routine basis, go through and pick those items out, that means they didn't end up in the water. So it's kind of a win-win, but it does require ongoing maintenance. Same thing with trash screens. But there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and I would encourage people to look it up online. And I'd love to see some demonstration products or projects throughout the Great Lakes looking at this, because as we know, there's a lot of combined sewer systems in our older cities and communities, which would be a huge undertaking to address. But little by little, I think we can make some good impacts.
Thanks, Nate. I have a couple questions about asking about resources, whether it's organizations or other companies that can come into a workplace or a school or a museum or other agency and sort of perform kind of an audit, to help you understand where the opportunities might be to reduce plastic pollution or other single-use items. And Andrea, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. That'd be great.
So we're really lucky at Shedd Aquarium to be a member of the Aquarium Conservation Partnership. It's a 22-member group that's working on policy issues as well as improvements on our business practices to build sustainable practices. And we work very closely with an organization called Plastic Pollution Solutions, a fantastic organization that does this very work. And it allows organizations and businesses to examine their flow and come up with smart solutions and to change over time. That's the other thing I just want to make a point about, is that this is an evolution. There's, as Adam was saying, maybe we don't have an answer today that works for outside of straws, but maybe we can in the future if we help and encourage businesses and manufacturers to build innovative solutions together with disability community and conservationists. Similarly true for businesses. If we work with folks like Plastic Pollution Solutions and think about ways to, over time, change your practices. It doesn't mean you do everything at once. You can do bit by bit, and each small step, whether it's in your home or at your business, can make a really lasting change.
Awesome. Thanks. I have a couple questions from students who are asking what they could do as, quote, just a student to help on the plastic pollution issue. And Nate, I think I'll turn that over to you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the tools that we include in the toolkit that they could actually go and start using right now.
Definitely. And just a student, you guys have a ton of potential and a ton of voice, and you guys using these tools is just as strong, if not stronger, than, just a water project manager like myself. So definitely be encouraged and use these tools because your voice is awesome. The ones that come to mind that I think would be really good is writing a letter to the editor for your local paper about this issue and how it relates to you, whether you see plastic pollution in your neighborhood or at your school, or if you've gone and done a beach or a shoreline cleanup, and you could talk about the items you saw, the quantity of them, and say how you want your community to be aware of this and feel that you should do something about it. That's always very powerful, and we know that elected officials and other people in the community monitor those opinion sections in local newspapers. You can also use social media as well, which is maybe reaching a wider audience with the amount of people that are on social media now, but you could post on Facebook with similar points, the amount of plastic that you saw out there. You could share a picture on Facebook or Instagram. You could put together a nice, concise tweet, and that can really spread and go viral. And you can always meet with your local elected officials or even state or federal as well. Even if you're not old enough to vote, you're still a member of the community, and they would love to hear from you. And they're pretty much people. They'll talk to you. You don't have to be intimidated by them. But you go in and you know what you want to say, and you get your message across. And there was a group in Toledo, Ohio, that testified about their beach cleanup and working with their local community to talk about plastic pollution. And watching that video online was very inspiring to see these kids really find their voice and talk to their elected officials. So all kinds of good stuff you guys can do.
Thanks, Nate. I have another question that I might start off with you, Nate, and then maybe Andrea, you would want to chime in on. But the question is basically asking, well, why spend time and money on research? Just go out there and clean up the problem. And I think the microbead ban is a great example of how research identified a problem and then helped people move forward with a solution. And so, Nate, could you talk just briefly about some of the research that happened that I initially identified the microbead problem here in the Great Lakes when we didn't even really know that was an issue that needed a solution?
Yeah, that was exactly it. When they first started doing voyages on the flagship Niagara, this great old sailboat on the Great Lakes, researchers were expecting to find, similar to the garbage patch in the ocean, these large intact plastic items getting caught in the current. But they're out there with their nets, and they weren't finding that many big items, but they're finding more and more tiny pieces, and that's what they're finding. And as they filtered out the organic material and plankton and things like that, and saw a lot of perfectly round spherical pieces of plastic, which is pretty odd, considering if these things are breaking down from larger items, they shouldn't be so regular and perfectly spherical. So then they kind of went backwards and said, well, what has perfectly round spheres of plastic? Then they started filtering it and looking at the face wash and the toothpaste, and they compared those under a microscope, and they realized they're the same type of plastic and the same colors. And then they went to wastewater treatment plants and tested their outflow, and they found the exact same perfectly sphere piece of plastic. But all of those were separate research projects, so it took a lot of work to really narrow in and find the connection. So you have a solid argument and a solid plan. So when you start to advocate for a policy and a solution, you've done your homework. And if people try to poke holes in your argument, you say, nope, we checked that out. So the research is essential to that. And it takes a while, but if you're going to do it right, to have a successful impact, you need to do that work.
So basic research is really critically important as emerging issues happen. We also need ongoing tracking and oversight to ensure that that what we're doing, so if we're reducing plastic bags, for example, is that actually having an impact on the amount of microplastics in the water? So using things like water treatment plants to test on a regular and ongoing basis to monitor how we're doing will help inform not only what we've done in the past, but what we'll do in the future to make sure that we're maintaining clean and healthy water in our Great Lakes Basin.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Well, we are approaching the end of our hour, and unfortunately, we always have more questions than we are able to get to in our time. However, and there were a number of very specific questions that we just couldn't get to. If you still have a burning question you want us to answer, you can email us. Our general email box is just alliance@greatlakes.org. And you can also visit our website to download the toolkit. We encourage you to download it and use it and let us know how it goes. Joel, do you want to say any words to wrap us up?
Thanks, everybody, for joining today, for your commitment to clean and safe water in the Great Lakes, and for a future where clean and safe water is shared equitably with everybody in the region, and that we all work together to solve the problems facing our clean, fresh water that we all love so much. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great day.